Contingency planning.
What do you do if?
You hope it never happens.
And it most likely won't.
But just in case.
You want to be ready.
You've got to be ready.
Contingency planning. It isn't just what door folks should use during fire drills. Not anymore. These days, contingency planning means preventing accidents before they happen, as well as being organized and knowing exactly what to do when and if you have a fire, or an explosion, or a sudden release of any hazardous material. The being organized part is important. Time and time again, when accidents have occurred, confusion and uncertainty have made things worse, sometimes turning little problems into very big ones.
An explosion and fire rocked a Texas chemical plant when a 900,000-gallon treatment tank blew up during routine maintenance of a compressor and other equipment.
Smoke and flames from a warehouse fire caused the temporary closing of the Newark International Airport and the New Jersey Turnpike. Efforts of firefighters were hindered by periodic launches of exploding paint cans, some of which landed as far as a half-mile away.
300-gallon tank of ammonia ruptured and released toxic vapors yesterday. The ammonia was used for refrigeration in a local meat packing plant. 12 people were treated at area hospital.
For the most part, these are local events. You don't often see them on network TV, and you don't always read about them in the Sunday paper. But these things do happen. From propane explosions in places like Anthony, Kansas, to sulfuric acid spills in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, hazmat accidents are an unpleasant fact of life for which we must be prepared.
One particular case is we were responding to an unintentional release from a tractor and trailer. As we were pulling in, you could actually see the leaves on the tree, and this was in the middle of summertime and they were green, turning black. The ground around it was actually turning brown. The gentleman driving the truck didn't realize how bad the product was that he worked with every day.
Contingency planning. These days, it's a legal requirement on the rails and highways and in any industrial or commercial facility where potentially hazardous materials are used or stored or produced as waste. This means the local machine shop, as well as the big oil refinery, the warehouse, and print shop, as well as mills and assembly plants. It's not just manufacturers and processors. Every business that uses or handles materials or chemicals or any substance that might possibly endanger the public health and safety is now required by federal law to have a written contingency or PPC plan in place. If your business uses or handles any potentially hazardous substances, you're responsible for them, and you have to be prepared to handle them if they spill or leak or mix with something. Even after they're hauled away as waste, you're responsible. There are almost no exceptions. If you have more than 10 employees, if you have more than a minimum amount of certain hazardous materials on site, if you generate hazardous waste of almost any kind, you're required by law to have a formal contingency or PPC plan that encompasses your entire operation. PPC. It means preparedness, prevention, and contingency. PPC plans must be updated annually or more often if you make any changes. And all employees must know about their plan and their role in it. Plus, they must review it at least once a year. Contingency planning isn't just something for company owners or the personnel department or the safety officer. Not anymore. Contingency planning is everyone's responsibility. It's the law. It wasn't always so. Time was when accidents in factories, job injuries, even fatalities were considered common, almost to be expected. Pollution was a sign of progress. Smokestacks meant jobs, and the more smoke, the more money being made. The mood changed in the 60s, as whole towns found their water gradually becoming undrinkable and their air unbreathable. A kind of momentum developed toward conservation of our environment and safety in our workplaces. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, was established to protect workers. The EPA was given primary responsibility for protecting the environment. Congress passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Toxic Substances Control Act, and more. Most of these laws made certain kinds of pollution illegal and made polluters financially liable for cleanup. Of particular importance was CERCLA, better known as Superfund. With all good intentions, our lawmakers had passed a bewildering array of laws, all aimed at controlling specific pollutants and potentially hazardous materials. The Department of Transportation devised its own special rules for the movement of hazardous cargoes on our nation's highways and railroads. OSHA added regs for the storage of flammable and combustible liquids above ground. But regulation of underground storage tanks came later under an amendment to the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA. The proper management and disposal of wastes was the main focus of RCRA. But this law also imposed strict emergency planning and contingency requirements. While all this was happening at the federal level, individual states were also busy developing their own laws and planning requirements, state laws that were even stricter than the federal statutes. The EPA, DOT, OSHA, there were plenty of regulations, but no one had much real clout. Enforcement was inconsistent. Industry felt put upon. There weren't enough inspectors, and it was sometimes easier and less expensive to pay the fine than to permanently fix the problem. Suddenly, in December 1984, an overnight release of poisonous methyl isocyanate from an American chemical plant in Bhopal, India, killed more than 2,500 people and seriously injured 150,000 more. And folks all over the world suddenly got dead serious about the threat of the hazardous materials in their towns and their neighborhoods. Could it happen here? After lengthy hearings, the United States Congress passed SARA, the Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act. Advance planning or contingency requirements were greatly expanded. Community right-to-know programs were required to ensure that the public would be aware of the hazardous materials around them. Each state had to designate emergency planning districts, and local commissions were formally given responsibility for preparedness and management of local hazardous materials incidents. Many of our environmental laws included timetables for compliance. Industry was given months and years to meet these new standards. Enforcement has become stricter now, as laws have been amended and updated. The EPA now can and does levy fines of up to $25,000 per day. OSHA fines can reach up to $70,000 per incident. More civil and even criminal penalties, including prison terms, are being used to enforce our hazardous materials laws.
Well, Congress wants the public and they want manufacturers to take these laws very seriously, and for that reason, you see the Justice Department out enforcing. These are laws involving strict liability, and what Congress is saying and what the Justice Department in enforcing these laws is saying to people, if you are going to run a business where you're generating hazardous wastes, you better be sure that the people who you put in charge of managing those wastes know the law, because if you don't, if you put people who are not well trained, who are not prepared to deal with spills, releases, know how to fill out a manifest form and ship a waste to a properly authorized facility, we're going to bring criminal sanctions to bear on you. It is no defense to come into court and say, gee, I didn't know the waste was hazardous, or gee, I didn't know that that constituted treatment, or that this kind of disposal needed a permit. The old days of a clean heart and an empty head are gone. That is no defense at all. Increasingly, we see the enforcement authorities being brought to bear on individuals, not just corporations. I can remember having a conversation with a steel company executive back in 1972 explaining to him that the recently passed Federal Water Pollution Control Act at that time provided criminal sanctions, including fines and penalties. And he said to me, "Jail time? You gotta be kidding. That's for people who do murder and rape and arson. You mean to tell me if I operate my facility so that I'm violating a pH limitation or exceeding a suspended solids limitation for a week, even though I know I'm doing it, and maybe I've got to do that just to keep the plant operating, people can send me to jail for doing that?" And the answer is yes, you can go to jail because you are knowingly operating your plant in violation of a federal law. Your job is to either get a modification of your permit or operate your plant in a different way. For some people, it's meant shutting down these plants.
Preparedness, prevention, and contingency planning. Okay, so your company is doing its part. You have a formal PPC plan. It has to be in writing, and it must be updated annually, more often if you make any major changes. Your PPC plan has to be a separate part of any other health or safety plans your firm might have. There's no one particular format that must be used, but there are certain areas that must be addressed in every PPC plan. Your PPC plan will be unique to your operation. What's it cover? Just about everything. What potentially hazardous materials you have and the exact dangers posed by each. The layout of your facility and which areas there show the greatest risk of possible spill or accident, be it flammability from a gas pump, chemical explosion from a processing vat, or environmental contamination from a leaky waste tank. The plan should detail what you do by way of regular inspection, good housekeeping, and maintenance to prevent accidents before they happen. Simple things like keeping areas clear for traffic and labeling containers, as well as more complicated maintenance procedures like calibrating monitors, and replacing worn parts before they break or malfunction. Proper ground wires from storage tanks, spill containment pallets, and even accurate records. These are all part of the prevention focus of your PPC plan. Your plan should say what safety equipment you have and exactly where it's kept in each work area. This means not only fire extinguishers and first aid kits, but also what you have immediately available to contain unexpected spills, absorbents, booms, overpacks. The law says you must have reasonable spill supplies and containment devices on hand and ready in case of any unforeseen chemical releases. Your plan should note your various security measures and alarms, even the possible effects of unusual weather or natural disasters, heavy snow or lightning, earthquakes or flooding. Plus, you have to plan what various employees are responsible for doing in the event anything ever does happen. Your PPC plan must spell out a specific incident command system, and it must be reviewed and agreed to by local, county, and in some cases, even state authorities. The law requires you to make advance arrangements with local hospitals, fire companies, and rescue units. If you ever do have a real hazmat incident or sizable release, there are certain immediate phone calls that must be made, and your PPC plan should contain a list of all county, state, and federal agencies that must be notified. Some written reports would also have to be filed. A detailed history of all accidents at your plant becomes a final part of your PPC plan. Someone is responsible for writing your PPC plan and keeping it current. In a large business, this might be a safety or maintenance director. In a small company, that someone might be the owner, or it might be a paid consultant. This person will likely have the overall responsibility for keeping accurate hazardous substance inventories, preparing plant drawings and detailed maps, conducting annual training, drills, and so on. But everyone in the company really has a part in a good contingency plan. All personnel should know what their role is, what to watch for every day, and how to recognize a true emergency, who to call for help, what alarms to sound, when to evacuate and where to go, what you can safely do, and what you must leave for others. To professionals, this is called simply awareness level response. This is very important. It is the first line of defense in the event of an emergency. The PPC plan defines exactly what each employee's role and responsibility will be if an accident should occur. You must be thoroughly familiar with your part in the plan. This shows a typical chain of command. Note the importance of the awareness level people. Managers, foremen, or others in charge of plant operations might be assigned a formal role as an emergency coordinator. Your emergency coordinator must really know your facility, your operations, and your contingency plan. He or she must have the authority to make decisions, to stop all production, to call for outside help, to start evacuations, to report the incident to the right authorities, and so on. The emergency coordinator is ultimately the one person most responsible for making sure your PPC plan is followed in an actual emergency. He or she is in complete command until field command is set up and staffed. Not all hazmat incidents are emergencies. In some cases, simple spills may be handled by people who have been properly trained. This may be a few ounces of acid in a laboratory, or it may be 55 gallons of solvent spilled in a loading area.
You're going to do an operations level response here. Defensive procedures, damming, diking, and controlling the material, but not...
Professionals refer to this kind of hazmat training as first responder operational. Let's say a tank of corrosive liquid suddenly overflows. A worker nearby notices it and turns in a call for help. His awareness was the first step in the chain. On-site workers trained to the operational level might then come in to perform defensive actions. They've had special instruction, and their job is to contain the material from a safe distance, keep it from spreading, and prevent additional exposures. Depending on the material and the circumstances, these operational responders may possibly take care of an entire incident, or they may just perform limited containment until hazmat technicians arrive. Some larger firms have hazmat technicians on staff, but more often responders at the technician level will be professional firefighters or members of highly trained hazmat teams. Technicians are the ones who actually do the dirty, sometimes dangerous work. They approach the source of the problem and actually stop the release. This may mean simply adjusting a broken valve, or it may mean plugging or patching or even the use of specialized equipment. Once the spill or release is stopped, technicians will clean up the material and decontaminate the area. Specialist response level represents even more expertise and advanced training in chemical characteristics, compatibility, and emergency procedures.
Specialist responders would only be called to the scene of a hazardous materials emergency when the emergency has escalated beyond the capabilities of the local emergency responders. But it is you, the awareness level people, who form the foundation of emergency response in your facility. It is a great responsibility.
An important part of your PPC plan is the list or inventory of all the hazardous chemicals in your workplace. The Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, currently designates more than 700 substances that are considered hazardous. And if you work with certain threshold amounts of any of them, they must be listed in your PPC plan. But just noting the names of the chemicals and substances in your workplace is not enough. You really need to know what those substances can do.
The call was received shortly after 6 a.m. The nearby fire company was dispatched for report of a computer explosion in a company that makes electronic equipment. The first inkling they had that there was not going to be a routine fire was en route. The dispatcher was adding EMS units, ambulances to respond with them, which is unusual. When the first arrivers got on the scene, they saw a number of the workers in varying levels of distress around the loading dock area, including one lady worker that it appeared that there was a waxy tarry substance on her hair. It turned out later that that waxy tarry substance was her hair that was literally melted by the chemical that had splashed on her head. We were all shocked to learn that this worker later died from her injuries. There are also a number of other workers who were in varying levels of injury. There were puncture wounds from the flying glass, from the explosion. There were persons with their clothing eaten away. There were some...
Investigators later found that this particular tragedy was caused when the wrong chemicals were mixed together. Other accidents in other places have been caused by leaks, spills, fires, explosions, you name it. We cannot plan for everything, but we can be as ready as possible. Knowing and understanding the substances we're dealing with is a big step in that direction. These are Material Safety Data Sheets, or MSDSs. A good PPC plan must include a copy of the MSDS for every potentially hazardous substance in your workplace. These MSDS pages should be very complete summaries of all the pertinent facts about each individual substance, trade and chemical name, manufacturer's name, address, and emergency phone number. Things like toxicity. Is it poisonous? Can you safely touch it or breathe it? Could it cause cancer? What's its reactivity? Does it explode? How does it react with other chemicals? What's it do in water, in air? Do high or low temperatures affect it in any special ways? What's its flash point? How quickly does it catch fire? Is it corrosive or caustic? How should it be safely stored? MSDSs also spell out what kind of protective gear you might need, goggles, boots, gloves, and what kind of material they should be. There's lots more. Material safety data sheets are an important part of your PPC plan. Knowing what you are dealing with is essential if you ever do have an emergency.
The reactor disintegrated. It literally blew apart. It was a very large reactor, the size of an average bedroom. When it blew, it took part of the building away, which was approximately 40 feet high, blew the front walls out. There were 55-gallon drums, which they use in their plant for the product. 55-gallon drums were sitting on a loading rack. Well, when the building exploded, it literally took the drums and took the concrete blocks and punctured them. It also took some of the other 55-gallon drums and knocked them off the loading rack into the ground, which again, now we had a potential air pollution inside because of the reactor exploding and leaving a product leak out. Now we had other products that were out on the ramp that were now breached and leaking, and some of them were laying on their side and had to be set up in the upright position. Pre-plan or contingency plan for any responders going to an industry, school building, apartment complex, a map system is something everybody should have. And all the progressive fire departments now, if they have enhanced 911 or have a 911 system or even an updated communication system, should have that map on a computer. So a map system is a key point in all pre-planning and all contingency plans. If you don't have that, you might as well not have a contingency plan.
A detailed map of your facility is important. Now, we don't mean blueprints, just a good, clear diagram of your layout. What are your boundaries and who are your neighbors? Where are your high-risk areas and how do you get there? To your loading docks and storage areas, fuel depots and waste or recycling units. Alternate routes should also be shown in case the normal routes are ever blocked by fire or explosion or who knows what. Your map should show drains, ditches and outfall pipes, fans, exhaust and ventilation systems, stairways and elevators, plus main and alternate evacuation routes, electrical switch boxes, gas or propane shutoffs, fire and emergency alarms, first aid supplies, emergency showers, spill supplies, and more. The purpose of the map is to help outside emergency workers help you. Now, most people will never need that help. They'll never experience a hazmat accident. But there is a part of the PPC plan that almost everyone encounters every day. That's the prevention part. It means keeping your eyes open, noticing and reporting things like cracks, leaks, unusual buildup of corrosion on pipes, around seals and valves, containers put where they don't belong. There are countless ways to prevent accidents. And one is paying attention during training so you know correct and safe procedures.
And we also need to study the MSDS safety sheets so that we know what...
A major cause of industrial accidents is the human element. Someone either didn't understand or forgot to do what they were supposed to. The thing about an accident is that you don't know it's going to happen. It is unexpected. The surprise catches you. Is this really happening now? But doing the right thing early on is essential. A rule of thumb says that what's done in the first 10 minutes affects the incident for the next 2 hours.
Attention, attention! There's been a chemical spill in the plating department. Everyone evacuate. Please evacuate.
Your PPC plan is an attempt to bring order and control to the unexpected. If you ever do have a hazmat accident, once the emergency is recognized, the next step will be to identify the materials and hazards involved. Only then can the responders decide on a reasonable and safe course of action.
Okay, Cap, we've got sulfuric acid and potassium cyanide spilled.
First is always the safety of people, removing the injured and protecting all others. This may mean a security zone around the area. It may mean respirators or chemical protective suits. It may require absorbent socks, overpacks, non-sparking shovels. One of the first steps will be to stop the source of the spill or release if possible. Stop the leak, reposition the drum, turn off the valve, whatever it may be. Safely stop the source of the spill. Then contain the substance. Vapor suppression agents or other specialized procedures may be necessary. Safe cleanup is a very important part of the process. Decontamination is also necessary. Then removal and safe disposal of all waste. Safe is the word to remember. Contingency planning. It's a lot of work. It takes time, and it can be an expensive part of doing business. But it's the law, and it's really for everyone's benefit.
And you have to make the choice. Do I do it the right way and keep our company environmentally sound, or do I do it the wrong way and end up in jail?
And seeing these workers in their severe injured state was just a graphic example of what can happen when all these processes and procedures are not followed.
If I was talking to somebody who worked in industry and dealing every day with hazardous materials, I'd say don't take anything for granted. When you're dealing with a hazardous material, you're dealing with the unknown. You're dealing with products that are multiple hazards.
Things could have been a lot worse.
Responsibility for environmental compliance really begins with you. It's everybody's responsibility.